On the Newstrack, not just are we in the middle of a pandemic, we could be in the middle of a job epidemic as well, because the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy and the man who runs it, Mahesh Vyas, will be joining me on this broadcast, as also Jai Panda for a government's perspective on what we're seeing. 27% of labor now seems to be unemployed. 27% of the employment data that the Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy is looking at say people have lost their jobs, which means that the data was about 7% before the lockdown. It's now jumped up almost, and that's deeply problematic. What's worse is that things could take a turn south from here on as well. In the midst of all of this, how should we be dealing with the situation that we find ourselves in? Take a look at what the data is telling us, and then we'll start this conversation.
As India moves towards rebuilding lives and livelihoods, a Mumbai-based think tank has raised alarm. A job crisis is now staring the country as several crucial sectors of the economy have been severely impacted by the coronavirus-triggered lockdown. The latest monthly data from Center for Monitoring Indian Economy says 1 out of 4 employed persons lost their jobs. The data shows that India's unemployment rate shot up to 23.5% in April as compared to 7% in January. The rate of unemployment is the highest at 24.95 in the urban areas, which include the majority of red zones created due to COVID-19 cases. The lockdown impact has been the most severe on small, medium and micro enterprises, hotels and restaurants, multiplexes, retail, airlines, manufacturing and media. This has led to job cuts as firms are scampering to deal with the emergency. And the situation is not set to improve anytime soon. The United Nations labour body has warned that about 400 million people working in the informal economy in India are at risk of falling deeper into poverty due to the coronavirus crisis. The ILO says that the pandemic is expected to wipe out 195 million full-time jobs globally. With India's economy already in a downward slide before the pandemic hit, the urgency for corrective measures is now at emergency pitch. Bureau Report, India Today.
My first question goes to Jai Panda of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Mr. Panda, the government has passed an order saying that companies should not be laying off people. This is a crisis. Take care of your employees. Now, on camera, when you ask them, they'll all say yes, but we know for a fact that a lot of companies under the radar are sacking left, right and center. What is your government's plan to try and alleviate this situation, sir?
Well, first of all, we must recognize that the COVID pandemic throughout the world has had a very harsh effect on the economies of all countries, not just India. And we recognize the seriousness of the issue. One more thing I'd like to put in context. If you turn the clock back 2 months ago or even 1 month ago, the predictions everywhere was that India would not be able to handle the pandemic and it would be in a very, very bad situation. But as it turns out, India has managed the COVID pandemic as far as controlling the pandemic goes much better than most other countries in the world. And so I think we should have confidence that the government is attuned to the economic problems that are already happening due to the pandemic and will take proper steps. I think the directive that you're referring to was an effort to ensure that there is no panic, because there was a lot of uncertainty as to what will happen, how long will the lockdown be there. It was, I think, incumbent on the government to inspire the confidence that things will get back to normal soon. And many steps are being taken. You know, several steps have been taken, both for the bottom of the pyramid, 1.7 lakh crores, as well as for industry, in terms of RBI announcements, in terms of relaxations, in terms of reduced interest rate lending by SIDBI, and many other things. But more will be done. The government is in consultations, is hearing industry leaders, is hearing economists, and more will be done. The immediate requirement was to prevent panic, and I think that has been done. The next step
Manish
is
Sabarwal, you have a sense of what's happening across industries. The government spokesperson says our first challenge was to save lives. We've done that. we're now going to do more to try and save livelihoods? What's your sense of how bad the situation is currently in the job market?
No, I think it's clear that the first priority should be that unemployment doesn't turn into a hunger problem. But I think that unemployment is going to be an issue. I mean, everything we do to murder the virus is murdering the economy. That may be the right sequence. That doesn't make it easier. And I think that, companies are rivers, they're not ponds. And so the reality is that after 45 days, if customers go on strike, without customers, there are no employers, and without employers, there are no employees. So I think that we're reaching the point now where the partial lifting of the lockdown is really helping. But the problem with the partial lifting is that supply chains don't respect green, red, yellow zones. Customers don't respect that. So I think it's unmodelable. We don't know whether we are in the middle or the end of the virus. As soon as we know that, companies can start planning. But, with a anthropological and macroeconomic cataclysm like the COVID, I think the notion that there will not be huge amounts of labor market pain is probably not true. I think we all will have to make sacrifices, companies, governments, shareholders, debt holders, employees, and those sacrifices have not begun in full earnest yet.
Jay Panda, the one question that's being asked of the government is, where is that second stimulus package that the government's been talking for days, if not weeks about? Other countries were much faster off the blocks, announcing far bigger packages than what we've seen. We've been told that a second package is coming, which could provide some kind of income support to some of the distressed migrant laborers, but we haven't seen it. What's holding up the package?
Three things. First of all, let's not compare with other countries where tens of thousands of lives were lost because the government got its priorities wrong, cart before the horse. When the pandemic was spreading, the very first priority was to save lives, and there India has done outstandingly well, as everybody says. Now, the time has come to shift the focus on getting the economy back in order, and you can see that is already being done. So, for example, although this phase is being called Lockdown 3.0, in reality, it should be called Gradual Relaxation 1.0, because this is different from the first two phases of the lockdown. The statistics that were read out at the beginning of this program reflected the earlier part of the lockdown where everything was shut. Now, today, things are gradually coming back on, although it will take a while to get back on. And I think it's wrong to say that the second stimulus has not happened. In fact, what has happened is after the first big one, the 1.7 lakh crores, there have been a series of announcements, 50,000 crores for something, 50,000 crores for something else, 1 trillion rupees for something else. And those should be actually, if you count all of them together, they should count as a second stimulus. What we are now expecting is a third stimulus. And whether it will be a large big bang type of announcement or whether it will continue to be a series of announcements catering to particular recommendations.
So some of the monies that you're talking about are monies that are lying with banks, which are meant to be loaned, but at a time when there's no risk appetite, nobody wants to take loans. There's a big debt phobia that we're seeing. So just saying that the government is insured through the RBI that there is liquidity, that's by itself not enough unless there's some risk appetite to want to take that liquidity. And in the middle of all of this, job cuts are happening, salary cuts are happening, there are no appraisals, no increments, and many people are having to deal 25-30% salaries knocked off. That's a big problem, sir.
Well, let me put it this way. First of all, to have expected that there would be no economic impact on something as unprecedented as this pandemic would be unreasonable. Now, it's not correct to portray the lack of liquidity as just related to the current pandemic. India has had this problem for a long time. Even when, earlier, RBI was not loosening interest rates, even though inflation was low. The last 1 year, it has started lowering interest rates. And even then, the liquidity issue has come up time and again, that banks haven't been lending. So this is a continuing problem. This is not a new one. But it's not just money that has been, or liquidity that has been improved. By setting back a lot of the deadlines has given breathing time to a lot of enterprises. Many enterprises would have gone into NPA territory, especially MSMEs. But that deadline has been shifted from end of March till end of December. Similarly, breathing time has been given for tax filings and other requirements. Also, money has been put into the hands of the poor where disposable income gets hit first. Tens of thousands of crores have gone into the Jan Dhan accounts of women, of contract workers, of construction workers, so that the spending power is there. So this should not be discounted. This is a positive impact on the economy.
Sure, but can I just draw on something which a top member of India Inc. told me when he saw one of our shows? He said, yes, we've been put on ventilator, there is life support, but what we'd like to see, Manish Sabarwal, is what's being done to take the ventilator off so we can breathe on our own, get out of ICU and get back to business. What do you think needs to be done to try and minimize the blood on the factory floor? Manish.
I think we have three tools. We have fiscal policy, we have monetary policy, and we have structural reform. I think obviously the next fiscal package needs to come, and let's wait for it. It's not only what the amount is going to be, it is where it's going to be spent. I think people should be shouldn't be unrealistic. We can't run a fiscal deficit of 15% of GDP like the US is running. That we're not a reserve currency. And the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet by 1 trillion in the last 8 days. I don't think India can do that. But yes, it's time for the third fiscal package, and it should be coming soon. I think monetary policy can reduce interest rates, give regulatory forbearance, and of course provide liquidity, which is going on. More of that should come. My case would be is that this is the time for flick of pen and structural reforms. I mean, I think that there are a lot of flick of pen reforms. We can make employee provident fund voluntary. We can continue the employer subsidy for provident fund. We can make ESI contributions 1 rupee per employee for 18 months. ESI has been overcharging employers for years. It has 80,000 crores in surplus. I think we should have a single labor code finally. So there's a bunch of flick of pen reforms which I think can be done. And then there's obviously the structural reform. I mean, just like Corona attacks patients with pre-existing conditions, Indian economy's pre-existing conditions are substantial. We're inadequately formalized, urbanized, industrialized, financialized, and skilled.
So those are interesting insights, but the one person who's looking very closely at the employment data is Mahesh Vyas. He runs the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy. Mr. Vyas, welcome. Give us a sense of your projection by looking at the trend line, because I saw a bit of a dip when there was a partial rollback of the lockdown in some areas post the 20th of April, and I thought maybe things will get better. But the new data that you've released shows another big upsurge. Where do you see unemployment numbers in India go from here, sir?
Well, that dip in unemployment that we saw in the week of last week of April, we all latch on to any little hope that we do see in the data. And we were hopeful that something good will happen out of that. But the next week soon turned things around, and unemployment has actually gotten worse at 27.1%. So it looks like, initially the people who were hurt by the lockdown were the casual laborers. So that is understandable. Street hawkers and daily wage workers, even some agricultural laborers will get impacted. But as the lockdown gets prolonged, people in the more formal parts of the economy also are starting to get impacted. So we are now seeing that salaried employees are also losing jobs. In the month of April, we saw 17 million of them lose jobs. That's a big number, around 20% of them or so. And the same thing happened to even the business persons who will not easily say that they're unemployed unless they feel that their enterprises are more or less finished and they cannot go back to their enterprises.
No, but Jai Panda said that this is easing 1.0, and therefore would it be fair to conclude that when data comes out next week and then from there on, that these numbers will start coming down as more and more sectors of the economy start opening up?
Well, we should hope as the economy opens up, these numbers can start coming down, of course. But I have a caveat there. If we work in silos, like there's a green zone, orange zone, and a red zone, one can see some improvement in the numbers from the green zones only if this compartmentalization is for a limited period. Beyond a point, this is not going to work. So just draw inference from the month of March when there was a partial lockdown in a sense. Still, electricity generation was down 8%, petroleum refining was down 18%, and fertilizer production was also down. All these are essential commodities that were allowed to function. So in silos, we can we cannot grow. We can only have some production, and they will be negative year on year.
There was a report that came out from the International Labour Organization that said half the world's jobs are in danger because of the pandemic. Your data is about 27%, which means that the ILO believes they could get twice as bad if the same data applies to India. Is that your sense as well, or do you think that's a bit of an exaggeration?
No, jobs in danger is different from the unemployment rate. So jobs in danger would mean that we have, according to us, about 405 million people working in India. So 200 million people should be losing their jobs. We are halfway there. Around 122 million jobs have been lost so far. So if this continues, it can get worse. I hope it doesn't reach 200 million.
The point that both Mahesh Vyas and Manish Sabharwal make, Mr. Panda, is that this whole business of dividing the country into zones, now supply chains and industries don't work like that, and the areas that are marked out as red are the areas where the maximum amount of industrial activity happens. About 65% of the industrial activity happens in areas which are currently notified as red. So they're hoping that you can unred those areas, just say that they're not going to be red forever, and that's very crucial to get the whole economy up and running again. Mr. Panda.
Okay, let's stop and think for a moment. The alternative to having these three zones would be to either have all red or to have all green. Now, I don't think that is rational if you think about it, because then the pandemic would not have been contained or the economy would have crashed much worse. Now, I agree with you. These zones do cause a problem because even though a green zone may be now getting back into active, units are opening up, the transportation of their finished product can often get obstructed because it has to go through a red zone. But if you must remember something, the Prime Minister took a lead on managing this lockdown by exhorting people, and they complied. 99% of Indians complied. Now, the Prime Minister himself is taking a lead in trying to shift, do exactly what you are suggesting. If you remember, before going into this third phase of the lockdown or easing 1.0, in his video conference with chief ministers, it was the Prime Minister who was urging all the chief ministers that without compromising terribly on the safety standards, we should try to shift orange zones into green and red zones into orange. So that effort is going on consciously all the time. And also, I would like to say something. I think Manish Sabharwal made some eminently rational suggestions, and all suggestions are on the table. Government is considering all these options. A crisis can also be an opportunity to make policy changes. And let's understand that there's a silver lining in every cloud. Let me just give you two examples. At the beginning of the lockdown, India was not a manufacturer of PPEs, personal protection equipment, nor a major known manufacturer for ventilators. But in just 2 months, India has become one of the most significant producers of both of these in the world. I think there will be opportunities coming up in the next few months that India can take advantage of. We have to be alert to that, and we have to shape policy to accommodate all of those changes.
We've missed many an opportunity before this, but yes, with manufacturing now looking to move out of China so that supply chains aren't entirely dependent on mainland China, there is a big opportunity. Can we capitalize? That is the critical question. Jai Panda, Mahesh Vyas, Manish Sabharwal for joining me on this broadcast. Thank you very much. Very sobering thoughts these. There is a real crisis, and our attempt is to ensure that you have the best sense of what's happening. Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.